their daughter was unresponsive.
Tonight, her death raising questions. He could not eat for a week and cried for a week.
He's seen a lot of neglect before. He said he's never seen a case like this.
If by the end of this video you don't agree that these parents are one of the worst to ever walk the face of this earth, you guys, I don't know what to tell you. Because after you hear the absolute nightmare that 36-year-old Lacey Fletcher endured for decades, in addition to everything else you're about to learn today, the cruelty, the lack of compassion, and the pure evil, these actions by two parents may be one of the worst cases of neglect that has ever been documented. And today, you're going to know everything, because the best thing we can do is spread awareness and demand justice for Lacey. Believe it or not, there is existing evidence that is so graphic and so disturbing, the courts have not released the evidence to the public, and it's very possible they never will. Now, in this video, I've collected as much of the evidence that's out there, including eyewitness statements, photos, expert statements, and more, so that by the end of the video, you will know exactly why Lacey Fletcher deserves justice for the inhumane treatment bestowed upon her from none other than the two people who were supposed to love and protect her the most. Illusions, guys. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Illusions and perspectives, when abused or mismanaged, can be extremely dangerous. And what we have learned in the past few days is that the Fletchers were the masters of illusion, deception, and evil. Now, this horrific story took place in a town called Slaughter, Louisiana, of all places, which already in itself sounds gruesome. So I dug up into the backstory of the town just to make sure what we were dealing with, and come to find out, the town of Slaughter was incorporated in 1889, and its name derived from the original owners of the land, Will and Joe Slaughter. And this town seems like the quintessential small-town America. And this particular neighborhood that you see right here, the calm and serene ambiance, the well-manicured lawns, and the friendly neighbors, among this resided this home right here. While it looks surreal on the outside, inside this house lived a family of three. The Fletchers, Sheila and Clay Fletcher, were pillars in their small town community, and they were even described as being very well respected within the town. Clay was a member of the Baton Rouge Civil War Roundtable and the Planning and Zoning Committee for the town. And Sheila was both a town alderman, as well as she held a position as an assistant to the city prosecutor. Now, neighbors described them as church-going individuals who went to church religiously every weekend.
They go to church, every weekend, and do anything for anybody,
So on the morning of January 3rd, 2022, at approximately 2 a.m. in the morning, these pillars of the community, specifically Sheila, called to report that her daughter, Lacey, 36-year-old Lacey Fletcher, had stopped breathing.
911, what's your emergency?
Authorities were horrified with what they discovered, and they immediately called the town coroner, Dr. Ewell DeWitt Bickham. And it was reported by local news station WBRC that Dr. Bickham stated Lacey died on January 3rd. And he was quoted as saying, "I opened the door, walked into the house. There was a stench, an odor, feces, fecal matter, urine. You couldn't hold your breath." What he saw in that home was so disturbing that he cried for a week straight.
The East Feliciana coroner, Dr. Ewell Bickham, could not release specifics with a pending grand jury hearing, but told me in his 30 years as a practicing physician, he could not eat for a week and cried for a week after witnessing what he saw inside the home Fletcher shared with her parents.
And this is coming from the coroner, guys, a man that deals with all types of death scenes and crime scenes. He's seen it all. And this was by far the most horrific. And it wasn't just the coroner who was horrified. The sheriff was quoted as saying, "I've been a sheriff for 6 years, and I've had a lot of things happen here in the East Feliciana Parish. But this type of scene, this is by far the worst." And what they found, you guys, was that Lacey Fletcher had passed away in the living room on the family sofa. And upon further examination, the coroner noticed that her skin had basically melted into the couch. Now, based on the evidence, the coroner's office believed that the only way her body could have been in that condition was if she hadn't moved from the couch for almost 12 years. And investigators said that she died of acute medical neglect dating back to at least 2010. Her skin, from her feet all the way up to her buttocks, was red and covered in sores, exposed all the way through the bone. Her legs melted the padding of the sofa, which sources have described as the sofa being a latrine. So my only guess is this had to be a makeshift toilet that not only was she going in the bathroom in, but that she was living on top of. The story is beyond horrific. And if this wasn't horrific enough, you would think that this in itself would be enough that Lacey suffered. But this was only the beginning of the extent of neglect that this woman experienced. Not only had her skin melted into the couch, but allegedly, her entire body, from the top of her head to the bottom of her feet, were covered in her own feces and littered with maggots and insects from the bugs living in and on her body. She also allegedly had pressure ulcers, also known as bed sores, on her behind that were so bone deep. And that was probably as a result of her wearing out that hole on the couch cushion where she both sat and urinated and defecated. And sadly, you guys, there is more disgusting and disturbing things found through Lacey's autopsy. But for now, let's just take a break for a second because this is some heavy, heavy stuff. And even if just one of these things happened, it is truly heartbreaking, let alone everything else that happened in its totality. So just remember that she's been sitting in this filth for over 12 years. 12 years in which every weekend her parents would most likely have to walk past her, head to their car, and drive to church while spending time worshiping and having fellowship, knowing damn good well that when service was over, they were driving back home to their daughter who was living in these conditions. Now, you're probably wondering how a 36-year-old adult could even be confined to a sofa for such a long period of time in one spot. Well, Lacey was autistic and diagnosed with severe Asperger's. And it seems to have gotten worse with time because as a child, she was very vocal and outgoing, and she was more social and even attended public school. She was on the volleyball team, and she could recite things and communicate things well. And it was believed that her autism accelerated when she was around 14, and this was around the time that she started to become homeschooled right after the 9th grade. Now, one of her childhood friends and classmates from her small private school in Brownsville Baptist Academy provided a glimpse into the girl that she knew long ago. Her friend was quoted as saying, "Lacey Fletcher was one of the sweetest people you could ever meet. She welcomed friendships. I remember her as a sweet, kind person. She was one of the first people that I was friends with when I started at the school, and she was already there. She was thoughtful. Just sweet is the word I keep coming back to. One of the sweetest people you could ever meet. So very kind. Lacey could be quiet, but also be very vocal with her opinions." So after the 9th grade, Lacey was homeschooled, and this is around the time that she seemed to become nonverbal, and it appeared that her autism was regressing. Even her neighbor described how he remembered Lacey as she would often walk around the neighborhood in past years.
I just knew she was, different. She used to come out and, walk, but I hadn't seen Lacey in 5 years.
One of Lacey's neighbors and peers recalled saying, "She became different. She just didn't see things the way a lot of other kids did. I last saw her around 15 years ago, like my dad. I wouldn't say I was a particular friend. She'd hang out with my younger brother sometimes, but she was definitely different from other kids her age. I knew she was not your typical teenager. She was smart. She was smart as hell. But I guess the best way to put it is that she wasn't as mature as us. She still liked children things, not teenage things. When she was 17 or 18, she was more into Disney movies and country music. She did invite us over to watch Disney movies, despite being more withdrawn. But that wasn't my forte. I was 18 and I used to ride motorcycles. So this was almost 15 years ago. And these were the days that it was relatively carefree for Lacey and her life. Because in and around her 20s is when she started to deal with new obstacles. Now, there are numerous reports and they're conflicting, so we're going to go over both of them. There are some reports that say that Lacey suffered from a very rare neurological condition known as locked-in syndrome. And the diagnosis is basically that the patients, while they're completely mentally cognizant, are unable to move parts of their body. And it's basically like being in a vegetative state, but you are mentally alert. Now, a woman by the name of Victoria Arlen suffered from locked-in syndrome about 10 years ago. She's now able to live and describe her ordeal in detail. And you guys have to remember, Victoria was locked in, and we are seeing her laying down on the bed. Now, poor Lacey was locked in a sitting position with her legs crossed underneath her on the couch. That was her static position. And if this is not locked-in syndrome, there are other reports that say that the coroner's office has denied that Lacey has locked-in syndrome. The coroner was quoted as saying, "I don't know where the term locked-in syndrome came from or what source it came from. In all my years as a practicing physician, I have never heard the term. The only diagnosis I know is that she had social anxiety first and severe autism second. That's it. Those are her only two diagnoses." So let's revisit the horrific date of January 3rd, 2020. Which was the date that Sheila called 911 at 2 a.m. in the morning to report her daughter's death. Now, it's important to note that January 3rd was a Monday. Did you know that Sheila and Clay Fletcher had just returned from a weekend trip? Yes, a weekend trip. And we know that Lacey couldn't get up herself to get food or water. And as you guys probably know already, the rule of thumb is that humans cannot survive without water for about 3 days. And they conveniently left for a weekend. My guess is that this is not the first time they went off gallivanting and leaving their daughter on the brink of extreme thirst and starvation. My guess is that this happened quite often, coming back in enough time to give her water before day 3 arrived. And in my opinion, there is no way this event is a rarity. And I know people wouldn't even do this to their pets. Leaving your cats or dogs or other animals without food and water for the weekend is unimaginable. And they were doing this to Lacey, a 36-year-old woman, and their daughter. Believe it or not, one of her neighbors revealed something that could be despicable as well. Now, this has not been confirmed, so these are only allegations. But one of the Fletcher's neighbors, Robert Blades, reported to news outlets that Sheila may have been forced to dial 911. He was reported as saying, "There was one neighbor here, we don't know who it was, had supposedly seen Lacey on the couch like that and told the parents they had to call the police. And that's what we were told. I don't know how much truth there is in that." Now, Lacey weighed only 96 pounds when she died. And aside from all of the other unbelievably horrific things we already discussed, the coroner also found her remains also tested positive for COVID-19, though no one outside her family had seen her in years, and it had been reported that Lacey had not seen a doctor since 2010, when she was around 16 years old. Now, you may be asking what the cause of death was, and the answer to that is a culmination of things stemming from severe medical neglect, which led to chronic malnutrition, acute starvation, immobility, acute ulcer formations, osteomyelitis, which is a bone infection, and that ultimately led to the final fatal condition of sepsis. And this is all according to the coroner. Now, you guys, she was so hungry that she was eating parts of the sofa around her. During her autopsy, they found sofa foam inside of her stomach, along with feces, and there were also feces in her nostrils and her hair and her mouth. And even more horrific, the prosecutor has not released the photos to the public that were taken on January 3rd when Lacey's body was found, but they were described as horrifyingly graphic. And there were reporters there who were able to look at the photos that were passed on from the prosecutors, and they described what they saw in detail. In one photo, Lacey appeared buried up to her shoulders in the sofa, which was described as wide and a deep hole. She looked emaciated and her body was slumped over to the left side, and her right arm crossed the top half of her body near her neck. She was left unclothed except for a small blue t-shirt which was pulled up by her neck that exposed pretty much everything. Her eyes stayed open and they were staring. Her mouth also stayed open, and it appeared that she had a full set of front teeth. Her legs were pulled up and crossed underneath her. Her face was covered in large red blotches, and there was excrement smeared all over her body, and it had matted in her hair and even inside her ears. Close-ups showed that the flesh on her buttocks appeared to be literally worn or eaten away from the 12 years that she had not moved from that couch. And there were large, raw, yellow areas where the skin had disappeared. Other back and buttocks areas were also so blackened that it was impossible for the average person to identify what body shape or body part they formed. And you guys, even if the photos ever are released, I'm telling you that I never, ever want to see those because they would haunt me forever. And already hearing about her condition is enough, but seeing it would probably scar me for life. But guess who did have to see those photos? The grand jury. There was a 12-panel grand jury that was shown everything. And the coroner stated that the grand jury was so horrified and upset that they had medics on standby. The jury was described as being in complete silence. Some of the jurors were gasping in shock, while others were staring in disbelief. And at the end of the day, they decided that Sheila and Clay Fletcher should face second-degree murder charges as opposed to manslaughter. And if this hasn't made you mad enough already, I was even more pissed when I found out that it took 5 whole months for these two to be arrested. Lacey died in January, and they weren't booked and charged until May 2nd, 2022. They were able to walk away scot-free and have all of their freedom for 5 whole months. And to make matters worse, a day after they were locked up, they were granted bail. On the night of May 3rd, Sheila posted $300,000 bail, and shortly thereafter, on the morning of May 4th, Clay followed suit by walking free as well. And shortly after, their lawyer issued a statement on their behalf, which stated, they don't want to relive the pain of losing a child through the media. They have been through a lot of heartaches over the years. Anyone who has lost a child knows what it's like. Now, supposedly after Lacey's death, her parents allegedly told investigators that she had some degree of Asperger's syndrome in 9th grade when she started to become homeschooled, and that's when she opted to never leave the sofa and instead go to the toilet on the couch or a nearby towel. Now, Sheila Fletcher alleges that she cleaned her daughter's bed sores regularly and that she had never complained about them. And the Fletchers were adamant that Lacey was of sound mind to make her own decisions. And even more shockingly, We haven't even talked about the floorboards right underneath the couch where Lacey sat for decades, because it's been reported that there were feces and urine sprawled and leaked all across the bottom of the floor, and that it was so much, in fact, that the wood floors began to decompose and rot as well.
Built for so long. Listen, we got a picture from the living room of the floors that were buckling underneath the sofa, the wooden floors, because it was just layers upon layers of human waste, urination, feces, all on those wood floors.
And really shockingly, guys, and what really blew my mind out of all of this, is that a few feet away from the couch, it's been reported that her mother would sit in her own recliner, where the family TV was, where she would sit and watch TV with Lacey in that condition, with Lacey a few feet from her in that condition. Now, one can only assume that that means that throughout time, these two parents just became accustomed to the smell and the condition, and it was like second nature to them. Now, how anyone can become accustomed to their loved one being covered in feces defies logic. And you know what? Even if Lacey's autism declined and left her in a situation where this is where she wanted to live and this is how she wanted to live, her parents should be culpable, because they could have gotten Lacey committed. They could have sent her to a treatment and care facility where she would have had a much better quality of life than this. Hell, even if she had been in prison, her life would have been better than this. So the status right now is that Clay and Sheila are currently on bail awaiting trial. And it's very likely that their arraignment will be in July or August of 2022. And it's been said that their trial could commence as early as October 2022. And what I'm hoping for, you guys, is that this case is televised for the world to see. And my reasoning behind it is twofold. I want this to be a cautionary tale and a reminder to those parents who may be acting in similar ways to the Fletchers behind closed doors, that this behavior is unacceptable. This reasoning and logic within your head is unacceptable. There are always more options. And if it's something that is overwhelming, you ask for help. It is very apparent that even if Lacey fully believed she knew what she was doing and she wanted to live that way, bystanders and people in a caretaker role would not and should not allow this to happen. It's unacceptable. And if you have to commit your loved ones to care, if they are unable to do it themselves, physically, mentally, or both, then that must be done. And the other reason I want this to be a public trial, you guys, is because I think this would be poetic justice for Lacey Fletcher. It seemed her parents loved to be seen as the pillars of the community and of society and a shining example of the town. Image seems very important to them. And the more people that know exactly who the Fletchers are, the better. They let their daughter live in absolutely horrifying conditions for decades. Now, we're going to stay on top of this story, and you guys know if there is a live trial, we are going to be there for every minute. If you were interested in this video, you'll definitely want to check out The Worst Mom on YouTube, and also the reality star who is a complete danger to women.